Hello, my name is Derek, and today I'm going to show you how to monitor GemFire using Prometheus and Grafana dashboards. This is the general layout that we're going to be using, and there are four main pieces here. We have a GemFire cluster, and the GemFire cluster is being managed, or the UI for monitoring that GemFire cluster is GMC, the GemFire Management Console. This is a replacement for Pulse and gives you much of the same metrics. From here, we are going to be scraping the metrics using Prometheus, our time series database, or an open source time series database. And then we're going to pull from that using open source Grafana to build our dashboards to monitor GemFire. So the key components here are in the GemFire cluster, we will turn on the metrics or /metrics endpoint. And then the GemFire Management Console is going to act as a proxy to the cluster for metrics. It will aggregate the metrics for all the different servers and then provide that as a unified dynamic endpoint to Prometheus. The big benefit here is Prometheus doesn't have to know about your GemFire topology. So as you add and remove servers or expand the cluster or whatnot, you're not having to update that static configuration in Prometheus. And then Grafana is simply displaying all of that information. The first thing we're going to need here is a GemFire cluster, and that I already have running on my laptop. If we go to the terminal, we can fire up gfish, the command line interface, GemFire shell, to my cluster. We can connect locally, and we have a user, and we can do list members. We can see that I have a locator and 3 servers running, and then we can do list regions. I always like to do verbose, and we can see that I have a number of regions here, mimicking an e-commerce type situation where you have customers, products, and transactions. Now, the big thing to set up when you are enabling Prometheus metrics in GemFire, if you go to the documentation, there is a page for Prometheus metrics that I will link to in the description, and you need to turn on the endpoints. On the locators, it is already enabled by default. So there's this enable management REST service. The default is true. So that will already be running. On the servers, you need to explicitly turn it on by supplying start REST API. And then you can also specify the port here. You can use the default port, but if you're running more than one server, especially on your laptop, you need to make sure that those ports are not going to conflict. And this is called the REST API, as that's what fires up basically the web server in GemFire to serve that /metrics endpoint. You can see in my GemFire gfish start server a lot of parameters here, but the 2 key ones are I have the HTTP service port and then the REST API. And then when I start my servers, I'll just increment that port so that it doesn't conflict. So the next piece here is to run gfish. Again, not gfish, but GemFire Management Console, GMC, another acronym, as this is our proxy or aggregator. So in the GMC documentation, also linked below, you can see the installation instructions. This will be downloaded from the Broadcom support portal. It's just a jar file. So I have actually already downloaded this here. We can see, make this a little bit more clear. I have this jar file. And then the command to run it, it's just java -jar. There's a couple of options due to later versions of Java that you have to pass in. So I will copy this. Make this a little bit bigger, and it's Java, a couple of these options here, the jar file, and then the port 7070. That is, or 7077. That's the default, but that's also where I want to run it. And the documentation doesn't have the latest patch version, so we want 1.4.3. This is just a Spring Boot application, which is really nice. And as we see it boot up, we should see that it is started and on port 7077. So let's pull that up. Localhost 7077. First time you come in, you'll be asked to, if you want to configure unified authentication or just log in. I just want to log in. We need to add our cluster. So we will add our cluster localhost. Host is local host, and the default port for our locator. And then I have basic security or authentication turned on. So we can, and we'll save that. We can click connect. I don't want to save a password. We have our server there, so we can go to our server. I'm not going to give a full tour of GemFire Management Console in this video. I have another video on that. But the big thing that we're looking at is GMC will show some basic monitoring information out of the box, but you get a lot more details when you connect it to Prometheus. You'll get the full history, as well as you can build out your own much more advanced dashboards in Grafana. So the big thing we will want to do here is configure the monitoring. We will want to use an external Prometheus server, which we don't have yet. The other thing I'll show you here is you can look at the different endpoints and you can see that I have my server in locator in 3 servers. So we could actually look at one of these. So if we look at localhost 7080, localhost 7080/metrics. And again, it's got the security on it, which is great. This is your standard Prometheus format that Prometheus will be able to scrape. So let's go ahead, just refresh that. Let's go ahead and set that up so we can use Prometheus, which means we need Prometheus. You can go to Prometheus's website, click on download, and then download the version for your particular operating system. For me, I'm on OS X with ARM, so that's what I downloaded. And if we duplicate this tab, we can see I have Prometheus. So we can explode this tarball. And then we can look in there, and it's really simple. Basically, you've got the one command here, which is Prometheus. The big thing we're going to want to do is run it with our Prometheus configuration. So I have that in a samples directory here, prometheus.yaml. Let's go ahead and open this in code, VS Code. And my sample is 2 things. Number 1, it is the recommended default configuration, getting started with Prometheus. It has your scrape interval, and it has Prometheus monitoring itself. So it has a job named Prometheus watching itself. I've then added the default GemFire monitoring configuration, which is a new job. You can name it whatever you want. You have how frequently it is going to scrape. And then the big thing is the URL that you are going to scrape from. So this is my GMC. That's the port, if you remember, and that's the endpoint. Once we enable Prometheus, I'll show you what that endpoint looks like. And if you want to see where I got this, again, it is in the documentation for configuring monitoring. This image should look familiar. And if you scroll down, you will see this configuration here. And again, you're going to substitute your URL. So what I want to do is now start up Prometheus. And I will warn you in advance, this is going to initially give a OS X warning. Oh, cool. I've got the command there. So Prometheus, the one thing I'm going to pass in is the config file. We'll accept the rest of the defaults like the port. And I suspect OS X is going to be angry because I downloaded this from the internet. So when you see this warning, sometimes it'll give you a link to settings to fix this, but what you're going to need to do is go to your settings. So system settings, and you will scroll down to privacy and security. And if you scroll down, you will see Prometheus was blocked. We're going to say allow. You can close that. We will rerun the command, get another warning. Here we can say open anyways, and give it my fingerprint. And Prometheus starts very quickly. Let's come back up here, and in a new tab we can go to localhost 9090 is the default for Prometheus. And the big thing we can look at here is the targets. Those were our jobs that it's monitoring. One is Prometheus. Prometheus is up and monitoring itself, but it is not yet hooked up to GMC. So let's bounce back over to GMC, and we can specify our Prometheus endpoint. So that is localhost 9090. And then the rest of these are the defaults. We can hit save and close that. You'll see this refresh, and now you have a time window to select from because it is pulling its data from Prometheus. And that configuration I just did is on both sides. So in Prometheus, in my prometheus.yaml, I configure it to know about GMC. In GMC, I configured it to know about Prometheus. So it's mutual configuration there. And now that I have configured Prometheus, we should be able to come back here and refresh, and we can see that it is pulling from GMC, and it has 4 endpoints, one for my locator and one for the 3 servers. Now we can actually see this if we point at that metrics endpoint as well. So the easiest way is just to copy this because I don't have that exactly memorized. And this will be on GemFire Management Console. So back here on GemFire Management Console, if we look at same port but Prometheus targets and make this human readable, you will see that same information. It is dynamically providing the targets. So my locator and 3 servers, if I were to take away a server, one of these would go away. If I were to add a new server, another one would come up. And this is how GMC is proxying my GemFire cluster to Prometheus. And it also makes it so I don't have to statically configure Prometheus to know about each and every one of the servers. All right, so we're here. We have Prometheus running. So we can take a look. First thing we could look at is up. Up is a built-in metric that Prometheus provides for each of the endpoints that it's monitoring. So we can see each of these. And then we could start to look at the GemFire metrics. And these will all be documented in the GemFire docs. But here I could look at GemFire. Let's look at servers. This will give us a list of the servers. We have 3. We could look at GemFire regions. And this is going to give us a lot of information. This is all the different information on the regions that it is scraping, including internal regions. But you can start to scroll through here. And as you filter, a lot of times I like to filter on this category cache perf stats. This is standard Prometheus syntax. So we have the metric GemFire regions. Category is the label, and we can say cache perf stats. Autocomplete is nice. Rerun that. And we actually get a smaller list here. But basically, we can start to look at different regions here. Like one of my regions is called play partition, and get different metrics on it. Now, great, we have this in Prometheus. This is obviously not the best view for monitoring it. So let's do the last step here and fire up Grafana in our dashboard. Grafana, you can download from grafana.com. You'll want to go to open source Grafana. You can click download Grafana OSS, and again, pick your distribution. So here I want Mac. You can use brew to install these too. I'm just downloading them, and then again, I want the, for me, ARM 64. So this is something I've already downloaded. We will duplicate this, and we can see, let's go back a directory. We have Grafana, so we can explode this tarball as well. This one has a whole lot more in it. Let's go in this directory, and we can go to the bin directory, and we have Grafana and Grafana server. I'm used to running Grafana and then specifying the command server. It's just a wrapper for calling Grafana server. So you can do the same thing. I'm going to run the defaults here, which will store the data locally in a /data folder and use the default port of 3000. So that looks like it's mostly started up. So let's come here and do local host 3000. Default username is admin. Okay. New password, I will keep the same. And now that we're in here, the big thing we need to do is configure its data source. So we're going to configure Grafana to point at Prometheus. We will leave the defaults here and just say HTTP // local host port 9090. Scroll down, save and test. It is happy. So then from here, we can come back and add some dashboards. I have 2 dashboards that I have pre-built to show off here. So I'm going to import these. In my samples directory, I have one for the cluster as a whole that we will open. When you import this, it's going to ask you to pick your data source. We will click import. And before we get into that, let me import one more, which is my member view. So cluster as a whole and then individual members. Again, we'll pick our data source and we can go and look at our dashboards. So I'm not going to walk through everything here, but I've configured a reasonable set of information, a lot of information coming from GemFire, looking at the cluster as a whole. So we can see how long has this been up, 17 minutes. How many locators? Locators is yellow because generally you'd want to run 2 for redundancy, servers, clients, and then a bunch more information. You can see the different regions, all the different operations, and then get into information on how compute, things like CPU, threads are looking, memory, disk storage. This isn't exciting without data, so let's fire up a client here. I have a little GemFire client that is going to pump some data in. So let's go ahead and run that. Make sure this is starting up. And here it's pumping in customers. So if we come back here and we can say auto refresh, this will refresh every 5 seconds. And as we start to see that data coming in, we will start to see the gauges light up. You saw low buckets flash here for a second. As we're initially pumping data into GemFire, it's going to be creating the buckets for the first time. And as it does that, some of them will be low for redundancy. But those are big things you want to watch. How many primary buckets, low replica counts, or missing buckets. Here we're watching gets, puts, deletes, transactions, functions. And then you can start to come down and look at how are we doing in terms of compute. Are we seeing a lot of delays where the processor is being delayed, perhaps due to garbage collection? How are we doing in memory? GemFire is storing its data on the heap. So do we have plenty of capacity, which I do in memory for that data? How long are the garbage collections taking? That's a big thing you want to watch here is the JVM garbage major pauses, stop the world pauses, generally should not be happening or should not be taking a significant amount of time. And then how are we doing on disk usage? I've configured disk persistence here so we can see disk writes. You can color code the gauges as you choose. This one I've set to automatically color code based on what Grafana is seeing. And since I'm pumping in data, it's like, wow, it's going really fast. But you can configure that as you want. And then we can drill into the individual members. This is the second dashboard. I should call out up here, if you have multiple clusters, you can select which cluster it is, and this will show you its unique ID. And then on this one, you can select which member you want to see, and it'll show you the full name of that. Locators have less information as you're not doing the gets and puts against them. But if you flip over to like a server, here we can start to see a lot of the similar information, but just for this server. So its uptime, how many clients are connected. My client must have finished because it disconnected. The other operations, so we load it. I loaded 1,000 entries into customers, transactions, products, and then deleted one from each to test to delete. That's why 999. And then similar information down here. But let's say we want to look at something additional here. Let's say threads, for example. I'll show you how to create a new one of these pieces. So if you click edit on the dashboard, and we can do add visualization. And for the metric, I want to do GemFire. It's JVM, and then I think it's threads, live threads. So we can see how many threads it's working. I want to filter that metric by some of the labels. The first thing I'm going to do is filter the cluster so that I only have one cluster here, but if you had multiple clusters, because you can manage and monitor multiple GemFire clusters if you have redundancy for geographic reasons or for disaster recovery. So I'll filter on that. And then here I also want to filter based on our member. So I can test the query here. Awesome, we see the number of threads, that ramped up as I've been running it. I can select the type of data I want. Threads makes perfect sense for a line chart. Let me go ahead and name this something better. So this would be JVM threads live, or JVM threads. And then this name down here, this is giving us all the labels in the metric. That's not great. So let's just rename that to live threads. Go ahead and run this again. That looks great. Let's add one more, as this is a common thing. We can see the live threads. Let's add another query here, and we can say GemFire underscore JVM underscore, let's see, peak threads. Let's see where we peaked out at. Again, we'll do the same filtering here. And member. So the name here is the label that is coming from Prometheus. And then the $ variable is the member coming up from this drop down up here. So we'll run this. We can see the peak threads. Obviously, this will be a topping out number. And then we can, again, rename it so it's something more useful, like peak threads to be consistent. We'll run the query. We can go back to our dashboard, and it somewhat annoyingly throws it way at the top, but we can shrink this thing down and then drag it down. This seems like it's more to do with compute, so we can put it down here with our compute information. And you can rearrange the dashboard and do a ton of different computations with this, including getting into the nuances of Prometheus's query language. But with that, I'll go ahead and save my dashboard, stop editing, and this is a view of how you can monitor GemFire using Grafana and Prometheus, all hooked up to GMC. So thank you for watching.